We start in the sun-drenched underground city of Khazad-dû, and catch up with a stunning and brave interracial dwarf couple, as Prince Durin is now an outcast after standing up to his dad for being racist against his old mate Elrond last season, and promptly being stripped of his duties and title. And before his wife Disa, aka the first black female dwarf without a beard, can tell him to man up and go apologise to his dad already so they can get access to their bank account full of gold again and stuff, a giant earthquake blocks off the openings of the light shafts, leaving them without power and food, and presumably now having to cancel all their plans for a Green New Deal.
Shame.
After the opening title card, Galadriel has a scary dream where her colleague talks in total gibberish, whilst getting roughly tied up to a tree in a red room like some 50 Shades of Grey meets Evil Dead reject. And after being bollocked for staring into space like a doped up zombie high on spice in the middle of a military planning meeting, Gladys tells King G that Sauron is going to want some rings of his own to rule over all of Middle-earth, so our Celebrimbro's in danger, given he's the only one who can craft them things. But he just says, Eregion has better defences than the US southern border, love, because it has a little gate and everything, so stop being a nervous Nelly and shut up about it already. Speaking of, a random lackey tells the newly arrived Halbrand to sling his hook already, cause Celery Bimbo don't want to see him no more, given he promised Gladys in the season 1 finale he'd have nothing to do with him again. But he just shrugs and pitches up his horse and camps out in the corner like a local hobo anyway. Elsewhere, a mysterious dark wizard conjures up one of them mystical Ku Klux Klan fannies from last season to update him on all the gossip, like how Sauron has taken on a new form to deceive his enemies, and how phony faker Gandalf is slowly regaining control of his powers, whilst one of his trackers, who's the one who was following him last epi, says he'll bring in the wizard in chains if he heals their illnesses or some shit. Meanwhile, said phony faker Gandalf fella is enduring the annoyance of little pests, and I don't just mean the sandflies, cause Nori just won't shut up trying to guess his name, what even he don't remember. And turns out it's not Dodric, Clive, or even Sir Gary Baldy of the Jabberwock clan. Damn! I was so sure it was going to be that last one. Anyway, Poppy reckons they can cut their trip in half if they just pop across the wide open plain of intensely hot desert despite knowingly being hunted by weird dodgy blokes in masks. Also, meanwhile, the dwarves still can't open up the sun shafts and thus can't grow any crops or do any sunbathing. So the king tells Chief Stonesinger Princess Disa to go shout rudely at the rocks already, which she totally does, but still fails in her one job of finding a safe path to dig. So the king calls her back in for a bollocking, which she then returns in kind when she calls him a stubborn git for not being the bigger man and quashing the beef with his equally stubborn son, and tells him he needs to fix up and go talk to his boy already, especially now the poor fella's getting bullied by a bunch of midgets at work. Kyah! He ain't going to be happily singing hi-ho anytime soon. Whilst back in the elf kingdom of Linden, the master of the resting bitch face competition tells her mate what invented Scientology that she's going off to Eregion to make sure that Celery Brimbozo fella's totally safe, given he's ghosting their letters and messages, and thus fears Sauron might be hanging about and totally influencing him and stuff. But given the king is worried about her own vulnerability to deception, Gil-G will only let her go if she's escorted at all times by Elrond. You know, the elf who disrespected his king to his face last epi before directly disobeying a direct order and then jumped off a fucking waterfall with stolen goods. But Elrond don't want to go on no stinking day trip to do a stupid wellness check on some old fogey, and she can't get him to change his mind for love nor money. Not even by fondling his left boobie. But after chatting with Círdan and playing around with some fishes for a bit, he begins to have a change of heart because reasons. Anyway, after Budget Gandalf faints from heat exhaustion from hauling a small girl and her fat-ass mate through the searing desert all day, they strike a bit of luck and find a bona fide water well just chilling out in the open and totally ripe for the taking. And although they rouse him back to health and finally quench their thirst, all their playful splashing is interrupted by a ringing bell from the well, which quickly alerts the naughty bandits what were hot on their trail. But luckily, the wizard finds a random staff in the sand and whips up a giant fuck-off tornado. But the doddery sod inevitably loses control of it, and the place is soon full of more out-of-control wind than an American family enjoying a supersized meal on Taco Bell night, as faux Frodo and Sam are soon swept away by the naughty weather, whilst the wizard bloke hilariously keeps anxiously calling out for his homegirl Nori, but doesn't seem to give a stuff about that random poppy bird.
Nori! I'm coming!
Elsewhere, Brimbo invents a new kind of material that can totally turn invisible, but is interrupted from his Nobel Prize winning work by the whining of his bleeding heart liberal assistant, who convinces him to bring that smelly hobo in from the cold, given Halbrand is still loitering around the palace gates and stuff. So Brimbus heads down to smack a bitch up and totally move him on already. But Halbrand promptly manipulates him into hearing him out after revealing all about what's happened with the rings he made last season, and has soon wormed his way into his private chambers and even given a tasty bowl of porridge to munch on.
Nice.
And old Sellers soon starts sobbing like a little bitch after hearing about how his jewellery totally saved all the elves and made their trees light up gold and shit. And the gullible fool is then manipulated even further when Halbrand says he's a special celestial messenger sent to get him to make rings for men. And before you can say, my ex-girlfriend got me a ring for men once and I ended up in A&E all night with severe cockburns, Celery Brim Bozo asks him to prove it. So naturally, Halbrand turns into some sort of ghosty ghouly spook and starts haunting the poor bloke's fireplace, before coming out of the thing with a whole new face, and like he's just done a guest spot on Stars in Their Eyes. As Halbrand, aka Sauron, tells him his name ain't even Halbrand or Sauron, but in fact Anatar, Lord of the Gifts. And if he works with him as a partner, he himself can then be revered as
The Lord of the Rings. When they say the title of a movie in the movie. He said it! He said it! There it is! There it is!
So naturally, the pussy old Mel totally cucks to this Anatard fella, whilst King G sends Gladys off to Regian under the leadership of that elfy flat-faced fella. And before you can say, okay, but seriously, how the fuck has this guy now got a promotion and not even in freaking jail already, when he disrespected his king to his face and disobeyed a direct order and then jumped off a fucking waterfall with stolen goods? We end with ex-Prince Durin and his chocolatey wifey bird receiving a message from them two naughty schemers over in Eregion, inviting them over for a sleepover or some shit. And that's it. That's the second epi. Though my favourite part was when Deezer said,
I'm bound to the dwarf I love.
Because last time I was bound to a dwarf I loved, I just ended up being fired from my job at the local council for shooting midget porn in the basement. Liberties! And man, we're now 2 episodes into the new season, and there's still no sign of all our other favourite characters. Like, where's the blind black queen and the Aladdin doppelganger? The budget Emma Watson bird with one heck of a forehead? And of course, where's the first black elf with one facial expression already? I want to know if he's managed to acquire any more looks over the past 2 years, damn it. Like, even a grin or a slight smirk will do, bro. But anyway, on to episode 3. We start with a lovesick horse called Beric, desperately trying to find his owner. And after running for days through dodgy terrain and up random hills, he enters the Black Forest where the orcs ominously reckon that no one comes back from. Kinda like the Forbidden Forest from Harry Potter. But ironically, he soon finds his best buddy Aladdin chilling out in a cave. Because this Isildur fella, who we last saw getting squashed under a beam inside a burning building, is somehow still alive. And before you can say, well, how the fuck did he end up here then, and wrapped up in silk like he's a star guest at some kind of kinky Anne Summers party? The pair are attacked by Budget Aragog, also from Harry Potter. And despite spending weeks trotting hundreds of miles to find him, Beric bolts off and gets the heck out of Dodge, because he has severe arachnophobia and also claustrophobia, and probably just worried that Jeff Daniels and John Goodman might turn up at any minute. But luckily, he gets himself free and stabs the furry freak in the noggin, before catching up with that pussy old horse and giving it a right bollocking for leaving him alone to fight off giant creepy crawlies and shit. Anyway, over in Numenor, Elendil buries the dead king alongside his Emma Watson looky-likey daughter bird, Earian. But before she can reveal what the dead king once told her before he pegged it, blind Queen Regent Miriel, whose eyesight was wrecked by a volcanic eruption but which left her lungs perfectly fine because reasons, takes a slap to the face by a disgruntled subject, who lost her son in the war what Miriel insisted they go fight last season. And instead of yelling off with her head like any sane monarch would, she just gives her a tight warm hug for her troubles. And later, royal advisor and cousin Pharazon prepares her for her coronation to replace her dead dad, and randomly states that on the super rare off chance that a giant eagle turns up at the ceremony, don't you worry about it, love, because it would be an auspicious omen and stuff.
Okay.
Also later, a northern visitor called Lord Belzegar, and who seems to be in league with that Pharazon fella, plots to undermine the queen before she's even crowned. as Iarian reveals how she recently found something secret and forbidden in the royal chambers. And before you can say, it wasn't the real Kate Skeleton, was it? We cut to some pussy old orc whining to his master Adar about not wanting to go to war anymore, given they have a home here in Mordor now. But Adar just says, listen pal, you live in a mud hut with your crusty bucktooth floozy, so stop talking about domestic dreams and future family planning, and shut up about it already. When suddenly, a giant hill troll called Damrod bursts in and demands to know where Sauron is. And before he can say, I dunno, but I doubt he's over in Eregion pretending to be someone he's not and fooling all the elves all over again for a second fucking time in a redundant repetitive plotline, we indeed cut over to Eregion, where Sauron is indeed busy pretending to be someone he's not and fooling all the elves all over again for a second fucking time in a redundant repetitive plotline, as his new persona Anatard welcomes the two lead dwarves to their office, while Celery Brimbor describes how he plans to forge some fancy new rings for each of Middle-earth's dwarf lords.
They shall be rings of power.
And look, he said the title again. Because apparently, these things can heal his mountain like they fixed up the elves' tree and stuff. But they'll need a steady supply of mithril to make them. So Anatard asks him to convince the Dwarf King to make it happen already. But naturally, Durin ain't quite sure about this blonde soy boy who purports to be Elrond's mate, and don't really want to have to go talk of magic rings to his dad who he's still beefing with. Elsewhere, a lost and horny Isildur gets himself penetrated, but not in the good way, as he meets a feisty chocolate lady called Astrid who's looking for a lost boyfriend. And he just can't believe she would shank him in self-defence despite him literally doing the exact same thing to that spider guy only hours earlier. So naturally, he takes this stab-happy nutcase along with him on his travels, but just ends up getting ambushed by an obviously dodgy gammon bloke. And it looks like it's curtains for the #1 Aladdin doppelganger in all of Middle-earth. But luckily, he's saved in the nick of time by the first black elf with one facial expression.
It's about damn time. It's about damn time.
Who's unfortunately extra gloomy these days, because turns out his own moody floozy called Bronwyn has gone and died off screen from that arrow wound she suffered last season, or was totally poisoned apparently.
Aww. Nobody cares.
Meanwhile, Durin confronts Durin about Durin's meeting with the elves, and how they can bag themselves some sweet bling if they just hand over some of that mithril muck what they keep scraping out the ground. But before the king can jump for joy at such a brilliant bargain, his son finally nuts up and becomes the metaphorical, and certainly not literal, bigger man, by apologising for cavorting with elves for weeks, and then building up a bromance with one what has the flattest face in all of Elfland. But also warns his dad that he don't trust this offer what sounds way too good to be true, and what comes from a race what betrayed them all last season. Elsewhere, Theo just can't get over his mum dying after she got penetrated with a black tool, but not in the fun way, and instead blames the black tool right in front of him, as he tells Arondir to stop trying to be his dad and sod off already. After Aladdin and his psycho floozy, who seems to love channeling the energy of Roberto from Futurama and do some more bonding over their dead parents, Astrid secretly tries to cover up the dodgy brand mark on the back of her neck, whilst an anger-fueled Theo tries to act a big man and confront a group of Adar's goons on his lonesome, but just ends up getting himself kidnapped by a massive mysterious creature in the woods.
Go!
Anyway, back in Numenor, the blind Queen Regent descends the stairs for a ceremony like she has perfect eyesight, and making us all wonder whether she might in fact be pulling a Stevie Wonder on us. But naturally, the crowd starts turning on her, given they all remember what happened with Anne Boleyn and don't really want a diversity higher on the throne, especially one what keeps elven trinkets locked up in a secret back room, as Budget Emma Watson reveals how the king's dying words showed her how the queen was taking counsel from an elven crystal prophecy ball, and said elven crystal prophecy ball is why all their people, fathers, sons and brothers died in the battle a few weeks back, given that was the thing what told her to go do all the warring and shit. So Pharazôn seizes his chance and stirs up the crowd, reckoning that she's a naughty witch and traitor to the throne, placing trust in elven artefacts and stuff, before it all kicks off worse than a 3 AM drunken catfight outside a kebab shop, when suddenly a giant fuck-off eagle turns up to squash all the beefing, and poor Muriel just can't believe that something a character said might happen in Act 1 has actually happened in Act 3, as the arrival of Chekhov's eagle promptly proves to the people that Pharazôn fella must be the true ruler of the realm. God, How much simpler would elections be IRL if we just let birds choose our leaders for us? Well, certainly can't be any worse than the usual communists, clowns and kiddie sniffers these days. And we end with Sauron finally casting his rings into the smelter. Something I'm painfully familiar with after I stupidly had that vindaloo last night and endured a smelting ring till 5 in the morning. Anyway, that's it. That's the third epi. Though my favourite part was the writers clearly mixing up their animals by somehow writing a horse with the behaviour of a dog, and shamelessly not bothering to explain how Isildur got out of burning building and ended up trapped in a spider cave.
That's a great question. I've been wondering that myself.
But anyway, that's the plot and that's your lot. Consider eating that bell thing so you don't miss the roast of the other epis when they drop. Tell me if you like this show in the comments, if you have time, and I'll smelt some rings with you in the next one.